So
I thought it was really good.
the dress rehearsal for the concert when we're in Boston, and we have a concert on the 15th. So that Thursday,
And
but I have to be sure I have
footage file. And it was just so basic.
Eddie has a chart.
So
You can borrow the chart. I was
There,
there.
I don't actually know. When I lived in concerts in LA, I was very
so some of the things dropped.
when I had all my outfit plans,
So I just
and my shoes. Really important.
Well, that's the shoes
How long
I
can I
have.
pass on shoes?
Because the shoes I wore are way really expensive.
I'm not a singer.
But it was sales, so I don't know if it's gonna be that more.
Well, and like I was staying with my cousin, like 2 miles away from home, and so I either took a cab or got a ride, and then I had to be there all day no matter what. I certainly would not be there. Still was like being on my phone all day long.
It's actually,
Yeah, we did.
so there is.
Good. Well, I'm glad you're here. Nice. So now you're going to bring a friend. Did you? Oh. Yeah, I hope so.
Sunday afternoon.
So I'll get up your time.
Your stuff is
I'll
awesome.
come back. You know, we have a brochure.
Monday, well, Monday I'll be taking over to the bus back because they had no business for Tuesday. We want to make sure stuff is ready for that. And it just, the timing is just not,
This is the one that shows all the other things.
And everyone will have one of their
Oh, okay. They'll get one of your folders. They'll take a look.
because I went to Seattle.
Yeah.
I saw it. I mean, it was, the staging was sort of a combination with the wind and wind.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to remind you of what.
There's some great YouTube clips of your class for discussion of doing what? I'm kind of like using video YouTube bastards.
What did he do?
He's just a nice computer guy. Yeah. He's great.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
No, that's my fault. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Upper America. Welcome to Upper America. For those who have not been here before, my name is Megan Young. I'm the Artistic Services Director here, and this is the nuts, bolts, and secrets of covering. So, if you haven't already done so, please just silence your cell phone. And we'll do about an hour session here, and then we'll have a reception afterwards. So I do hope that you'll stay for the reception and have a glass of wine and chat with us some more. Also, please do feel free to have a brochure and a magazine in your folders. Take a look at those. We also have a number of resources around the office here, including our perspective series of books for singers. So feel free to peek around those during the reception. If you have any questions about anything, just come over and talk to me. So I won't talk any longer, and I'll just turn things over to the intrepid Katie to talk to us about covering.
Great. Thank you. Well, welcome, guys. Thanks for coming out. I'm Katie Drago. It says Catherine everywhere. Please call me Katie. And I'm here to present the nuts, bolts, and secrets of covering. And I'm glad that you're all here. This is the perfect size group for this event. Trust me, I understand that. I'm a singer myself, and had my first covering experience in 2004. And had I had to step on stage in that role, would have crashed and burned. Would have been a disaster. And I never wanted to feel that way again, that kind of anxiety through that process. And so I've gone on, I've actually covered about 10 roles in the last 5 years. And through that time, I've sort of built a process that works for me, and have observed a lot of other covers and been involved in an artist program, so that's a big part of our job. And so I decided, you know, it would have been really helpful had I thought about this before that experience in 2004, going into that job, because it is a job, right? So that's where this kind of came from, this nuts, bolts, and secrets of covering. I'm not here today to tell you how to get a job or even how to do the job, but rather to try and motivate you to think about how you learn, how this process will be satisfying to you, what it means to be a cover, and so maybe you can make a plan for the next time it's part of your job. So that's kind of the general spiel. How many of you have had experiences covering already? Nice, nice. And you're still standing, so you weren't crushed. That's excellent. So we'll try and, go off of those experiences. And I'm going to ask you to participate a little bit along the way, so feel free to not be shy in that sense. So let's get going, right? The first thing I really want to do is define what a cover is. What is covering? Any ideas? Definitions. Nothing. Zero. It doesn't even exist in the world. Yeah. Anybody?
Understood.
Cover is an understudy. Okay. Anything else?
Insurance for the company.
Yes. Oh my gosh, you read my mind. You're an insurance policy. Those are two really big ones, I think. Maybe also you're a standby. These are all sort of different words that kind of mean the same thing, right? It's interesting in opera how we use cover. We're not in understudy most often. Some companies you will hear the phrase understudy. You know, you're not studying the role. You're not under a person. You are a colleague. You have been contracted to know the role and to be a standby in case they need you as an insurance policy. So in a way, you're not a comfort for that person you're covering, but rather a comfort for the company that you're covering for. And I think that's important in terms of your thinking too. You're covering Adina, you are an Adina. You're not under anybody, you're not studying. I mean, in a way, we're always studying. So that's kind of a phrase we can think about a little bit. But I think it's important to have an idea of where you are in that spectrum. So those are good. Anything else we should know about what a cover is? No? We're good? I like those three. Okay, so now you are a cover. You've been contracted to do some covering. What do you want to get out of that experience? What does it mean to be a cover? What do you hope that experience gives you? Yeah?
Well, besides the opportunity to actually perform the role,
Yeah.
I would imagine just have the opportunity to fully work the role into
Mhm.
voice and maybe even get, work with staging, even if it's by yourself.
Right?
It can't hurt to be near a stage.
It can't hurt, no. It's kind of fun most of the time, right? Yeah, I think absolutely. You've learned the role musically, you've studied it, and now you really get to inhabit the role, to really know it. I think there's some other opportunity that comes out of this. I think another opportunity might be networking, building a relationship with a company, with a conductor, with other colleagues, with music staff. There's a lot of people involved in opera, and you're part of that wheel that's spinning as a cover. What else do we want to get out of this experience? Yeah.
Maybe the opportunity to practice professionalism
Yeah.
and learn how to work it into your life.
Yeah. That totally. I think I think that we're going to go a little zigzag sometimes here, and that's totally okay. I think it's interesting that the job of covering is really challenging, and we'll get into those nuts and bolts in a bit. But oftentimes it is in the hands of young artists, and it's a new experience. So it can be dangerous in terms of perhaps some unprofessionalism. So in a way, it's also an opportunity to learn about the business, maybe. The business of singing, the business of artistry, something like that. Yeah.
I think it would be an opportunity to experiment. I imagine that if you were sitting there going to every rehearsal, you could kind of hypothetically, technically you're involved in the same cast, but you can start to think about what you might do differently, how you might respond differently to the conductor and yada yada.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from you is that you might be someone who'd be satisfied by this challenge.
Well, I'd like to get on stage, but
there's a challenge in covering in terms of you do have to kind of think about all those details from your seat. So perhaps not the time to be experimenting if you do go on stage. You don't want the production to come crashing
No, but to
down.
have it worked out in your mind and have played with some things from a different perspective.
Absolutely. So I think, there's maybe some, I'm going to just put experiment here. Am I spelling things right? If I'm not, tell me. Is that even right? Looks like peppermint to me right now. Another thing that I like to think about too for covering, it's a paycheck. It's a job. You might be covering today and going on tomorrow, or next month the person who's covering you might be the person on stage and you might be covering them. It's a big part of this business and how opera works, whether you're flying in to do the role or you're there for the whole process. So it is a job. It pays your rent, and that, I think, is also something you can get out of the experience. Anything else? Yeah.
The opportunity to observe maybe more experienced people in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Learn about the business and other artists. I think that's a good start. I'm going to keep this list out, and I'm going to try not to rip everything. Oh, pretty good. And I'm going to tape it here, because I think this is a really important list, because it's something you really need to keep in mind throughout the entire process. What are you wanting to get out of your experience as a cover? What rewards? It's a little bit about the cognition, the positive thinking. well, why am I here? What am I doing? And how can I be more positive in this scenario to be that force in the room? So I think that's really important. So we're going to talk a little bit about your role as a cover now. We're kind of going to go through the process. I'm going to assume we all know the role we're covering. Adina seems to be the role of choice for me today. I don't know why. So that you already know this role, you've prepared it. Now it's important for you to define your role as the cover. I think that there's a couple of different things to think about here. Who are you to this company? Are you a hired professional? Are you coming in at the beginning of the rehearsal process, in the middle of the rehearsal process, as they're on stage? Are you a young artist? Are you a young artist coming in for only the period of this production time, or do you live in this city, in Portland, Oregon, let's say? Here's an example where comfortability can sometimes breed a little bit of unprofessionalism. So you need to really define your role in this company and understand that, yes, this music staff, these guys, these people are my friends. This conductor lives next door to me because I live here all year. But in this situation, I'm a cover artist. And what is your role within the company and within this rehearsal process? So I think that's very important to think about, even before you show up, perhaps. Who are you covering? Is this a friend, someone you know, someone you went to school with, someone you've been in another production with? Is this an esteemed artist, someone you look up to who has an established career? What does that mean? How does that change your role within this process? Because artists, we can be a little finicky. Attitudes and egos can float around in different ways, so you need to kind of be aware of those types of things. So I think in defining your role, there's a couple of things that I like to think about, just basic things before we start going through this rehearsal process. One thing, once you sort of figured out your role, is where to sit, where to observe, where to be. You know, part of being a cover is to be there and be, you know, actively observing, but to not be in the way of the staging that's actually happening. That you're not technically a part of, kinesthetically speaking. So you need to have a pretty good sense of intuition. I wanted to call this seminar intuitive covering for a long time because I think that's the quality that's most used as a cover. You know, use your intuition, gauge the room. Is there a good place to sit where you're not going to be distracted by other colleagues? That you're going to be able to see what you need to see to do your job, but again, allowing other people to do their jobs as well. So, something to think about. The second thing I really want to think about in terms of the role is a contact person. So, the contact person, probably not the general director of the company. I'm thinking I wouldn't go there first. You know, might be a very nice man or woman, but I think a contact person for a cover is most likely an assistant director, if there's a cover process in place. You're going to see a lot of different companies along the way in your experience through your career, but also perhaps as a cover artist. And a company that has a cover process in place, meaning you perhaps have rehearsals with a cover cast, there's an assistant director as well as an assistant conductor who you will have a relationship with. Those can be great contact people if that's already in place. A lot of companies, that might not be in place. You might be there as that insurance policy, you know, making your rent and having this great opportunity, but there's not an assistant conductor. There may not be an assistant director. I would say stage management can be a great resource in that case, probably starting with an assistant stage manager. That's somebody you can feel comfortable asking questions to. I think as a cover, you're going to hear me say this ad nauseum over the next hour, you always need to err on the side of discretion. So you want to ask concise, specific questions at an appropriate time. And that's not always easy in these sort of chaotic rehearsal processes, but something to think about. So now you sort of have a sense of maybe where to sit, who your contact people are, and we talked a little bit about the intuition of covering. You know, there's a behavioral etiquette here. You have to sort of keep in mind that there are egos in the room, that, you know, I like to think in do's. What do I want to do? What's a positive do I can do in this scenario? Being that positive force in the room, thinking positively, supporting the process, but knowing that this is actually someone else's process at the moment. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to create your own process separate, as you were saying, kind of getting those wheels turning, that's not going to prohibit or make anyone nervous in the rehearsal room, because it's a little dicey from time to time. So, you know, being your own parent or best friend in these scenarios is good. I think just sort of thinking that way, it seems really common sense, but we have to remind ourselves as artists when we're so comfortable and things become intimate in these scenarios so quickly, to keep in mind that behavioral common sense, I think, along the way. So now, we sort of know the role. We need to talk a little bit about the job of covering. You are there to know this role better than anyone else. It should be faster, cleaner, better, tighter, more specific than the person doing the role. Because you've got all the time in the world to sit and think about how you would do it and how can you put your body into this scenario. So it's really your job to get it in your bones. And you can feel satisfied at the end of the day that you really know it. And then when I talk to, in preparing this process, to agents and psychologists and directors and stage managers and artists, you know, they often say people like to hire people who've already done the role. Well, if you've covered a role significantly in a house, you have done it in a way. You know it. So that can be something that can be a positive force for you, hopefully, for your future. So we're going to go through the rehearsal process. In preparing for this seminar, I interviewed a little over 75 to 80 people in the business, as I mentioned. Artists, singers, stage managers, directors, assistant directors, general directors, psychologists, talking about what it means to be a cover and what, you know, gems they can pass on. So this content doesn't just come from my experience, but from many people's experience and advice. And so I hope that you'll take what works for you and sort of start to think about it. Okay, so the first step, we're going to go through the whole rehearsal process. We're going to start with the sing through the room run. So is everyone familiar with those terms? Sing through, room run? Awesome. So day one, we're going to talk about music separately at the end. So let's just sort of cross off sing through. I think the most important thing here to think about is that you are creating your own rehearsal process. How are you going to inhabit this process? The same thing that's happening for the principal artist on the stage. So you kind of need to get set up. We've already talked about being intuitive, gauging the room. So a lot of different ways to do this. As artists, you guys already know a lot of different ways people keep their scores even. Do you translate in the score? Do you like a clean copy at your music coaching? Do you photocopy? Do you bind with combs or circles? Or, you know, there's all kind of, we know Kinko's really well. So I think, you know, there's a lot of different ways. I like to set up a rehearsal on a music stand. They're usually around in a rehearsal process. You can usually find them. This is not the only way to be, but it's a way that I think is helpful. Maybe you want your score on your lap. Maybe you don't even want your score. You know this role. So cold, you're just going to write things down in a notebook. I'm not that person, but I envy that person. I like to set up a score. You know, I've got all my stuff in it. I keep everything in one place. It's, you know, only I can sort of read the notes by the end. And I like to have some paper around to keep emotional notes, things like the conductor or the director might say that inspire you, that inform some of the decisions you might make in doing this role or preparing the role. Always we have pencils. That's just who we are as musicians. Other things you might have on hand. Let's say you're covering a Handel opera or Mozart opera. Might not be a bad idea. Have some staff paper around because you're going to need to know what those ornaments are that the person you're covering is actually doing. So I think that's helpful. You're going to be creating a map in this score for yourself in terms of the blocking. So you have to decide how you want to do that. I've been sponsored unofficially by 3M, and I think that I really like Post-its. Post-its come in all different sizes. So maybe you like big Post-its, maybe you like medium Post-its, you like to tear your Post-its up, you like squares. I like squares myself. Or maybe you have excellent handwriting and you can do these little dudes. I've seen people use them, I don't know how it happens. So Post-its are the way of covering, as so it seems in my interviews and discussions with artists. I think part of the appeal of the Post-it is that you can erase, you can move, you can draw pictures and adjust as the process goes on. You're going to be keeping track of a lot of information and it's going to change. often, perhaps. So it's not a bad idea. You know, you might use pencils. You might be a colored pencil girl. Colored pencils. Maybe you get this around. Now the stand's getting a little crowded. Obviously, you're not going to have this much stuff. But I think it's really important to have the setup you like, to know what you need in your rehearsal process, to have those materials. In sort of preparing for that process, I think it's really important to also kind of know how you learn a little bit. What is your learning style? Are you a kinesthetic learner? Okay, this process might be tricky for you, right? You're not on your feet. Are you a visual learner? Excellent, but remember to take notes. Or are you an auditory learner? And how is that going to affect your knowing the map of this show? So I'm not going to go through this document per se, but I think it's something to think about. And I would try and challenge you to think not only what you prefer in terms of learning style, but what really is your strength. So maybe think back to some situations in your musical life, even just in your educational experiences, that have been really great, that you really felt like you nailed it. And what was that process like? How did you learn that role? And maybe think about, okay, well, maybe I am a little bit more of a kinesthetic learner than I thought I was. And just knowing these things, I think, is going to help you to know how to review the role to the best of your ability, and really how to learn it and get it in your bones. So we'll talk a little bit about learning styles as we go on, but it's just something I hope you'll sort of consider. Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? You know, there's a lot of different approaches to learning styles. This is just kind of one basic layout. You need a method that works best for you. There's a quote on the back of this page about competency, really. And I read it on an airplane, you know, I'm always on airplanes. And it says that often the most confident people are the least competent. Tricky, but interesting, I think, in the world of covering. You know, your job is to exude an overwhelming amount of competence without anyone noticing. A little hard to do, you know, but I think it is important to keep in mind that overconfidence doesn't necessarily mean anything. You know, everyone knows singers are eager sometimes in these scenarios, and it's a good idea just to, again, define your role, use your intuition, gauge the room, err on the side of discretion, and know that if you do good work will come to you. Making good art means good art will happen. So you just sort of have to, I think, keep that energy in mind. So now we know where our rehearsal will be, where we will be inhabiting this role. The sing through the room run. What do we think some of the most important things during this time period might be in terms of making our map? Ideas? I'm thinking blocking. Just sort of basic blocking might be helpful. That's one. One thing to consider during this time period, this is the closest you'll ever be to the process. There's no pit, you're not in a theater, you can actually be able to hear what the conductor is saying, what the stage management is talking about, watching the artist handle props, perhaps some costume pieces, seeing entrances and exits, not in the theater. So what are they talking about? Is that going to be complicated? Is there a wing there? Things like that. So when you're this close, I think this pad of paper comes in handy a lot in terms of why are they making that musical choice, and if you can't hear, let's say you're in a room where you're not privy to the conversation, you know, how keen are you to notice what changed? How did the aria change when she went back and did it again? I wonder what the director said, and maybe this is part of what you were talking about in terms of like, well, I think this. Is it what the director said? I don't know, but it's what you, the audience member at that moment, gleaned. And that can be important for your process. So keeping in mind that you're close, I think this is when you get a lot of detail. Detail that perhaps will change, and that's why we like Post-its. But I think you want to get the blocking down, and I think you want to take as many emotional notes as you can during this time period. This can be, you know, dangerous and tedious as they talk about things, but you get to be there. You know, you get to sort of be a part of that process, hopefully, and be able to hear it. And so I think that's really important. So let's talk a little bit about blocking and how we're going to notate this blocking. There's a lot of different methods out there. I think it's really important to be at every rehearsal because that's how you're inhabiting the process. That's how you're getting to know the role. That's how you know why and when the changes happened and what that really meant. So I think, you might see friends or colleagues who have different methods and they're showing up a little later in the process to notate the blocking. That might work for them. That's cool. I think in terms of really having a satisfying experience and inhabiting this role, it's important to be there along the way. So let's talk a little bit about basic blocking symbols. Now, this might be really rudimentary, so, but let's just, review for the sake of review. These are our basic blocking symbols. Cross. We can create new things. Cross, down, right. Cross, upstage, maybe even center. I can put that one on there. Exits and entrances are their wings. Do you want to do enter in wing 1, exit in wing 2? A lot of different methods here in terms of notating the blocking. This has a lot to do with how you keep your score as well. We've got these Post-its. You can put those in there. You might ask your contact person, stage management most likely, for a map of the stage. They often have these things around. Again, how comfortable are you at this company? Do you have a good contact person? Is this appropriate? So let's say you ask them for that. Maybe you're a photocopy girl and you're left-handed and you set up your score like this. Maybe this isn't available, but you still like the idea of being a football coach and mapping everything out like this. So you draw your own. Maybe you just have some paper on hand. That emotional pad sort of becomes also a tracking sheet. And you can make your own sort of thing. Here are the columns, and here are the doors, and here's Romeo, and he's going to go over here, and then he's going to go over here, and he meets Tybalt, and then he goes over here, and he exits over here, and if that makes sense to you, fine. It has to make sense to you and only you. It's your map, so you can do it however you want. I think when you're dealing with choreography, when you're dealing with big ensemble scenes, the more stuff and the more people, the more traffic problems. So sometimes I think creating these kind of maps can be really helpful. And if you have something like this, and there may be different pieces like this for different sets, different acts of the show, and you can get your hands on that, it can be a really good tool and something that can be really helpful. So I think that's something to think about in this first set. Once we get to the room run, so the final run through in the room before we go to stage, your map for the room should be pretty set. This is the time to kind of confirm that blocking before we go to stage. Check out your maps. You've probably got the whole chorus in the room, the whole team there. It's mass chaos usually at those events. So you want to just kind of confirm this. You know the role well, and you're reviewing every night, every hour, I don't know, depends on how you are. You're reviewing constantly, so the map should be pretty clear. You should be able to watch the room run and know your map and notice if things are a little different perhaps than maybe what you've had. During this time period, again, when you're close, you're also close to the conductor, so musical phrasing, things like that can be a little bit easier to observe. Cues, if the conductor is there, maybe the conductor might not be there, or it could be an assistant conductor at that time. So again, this is there's a little flexibility involved in all this information, and that intuition really comes into play, I think. So, sing through room run, we've got our blocking, we've got basic entrances and exits, we have a plan, or we think we have a plan. So, then we go to the first stage rehearsal for the zits. Keep in mind, we're going to talk about music in a little bit. First stage rehearsal, whew, man. Okay, what do we think maybe the most important thing might be during this time frame? A lot happens, right? What's sort of the biggest thing that happens in this time frame? Blocking changes, sure. I also like to think about tech. And a lot of changes come out of tech. And this can be a really enticing time, I think, as a cover, as a young artist, as anybody, because they're long rehearsals. They're tedious rehearsals. So you might be enticed to go and get a biscotti and miss a few hours of that rehearsal. And, that's up to your discretion, depending on how good your map is. But I think these are some of the most important rehearsals in a process. And especially if you enjoy the challenge of getting these details from the stage and creating your map and learning your role and having that process and having your own rehearsal. First stage rehearsal, into a lot of tech, the lights are still on in the house to a certain degree. You can still see your score. You can still see your map. You can make changes as you see fit to that map. It's a good time to notice things like, boy, he's having trouble finding that light. Or, that door seems to stick quite a bit. Is this going to be a challenge for me if I were to go on? Is this something they're working out? Now, in a lot of opera houses, there's not a lot of wing space. Sometimes there's a ton of wing space on the sides of the stage. So you might have the opportunity at a rehearsal on a break to walk the stage, to touch the props. Again, err on the side of discretion. Always ask first. The crew will really appreciate if you say, "Hi, could I see the music box that I need to, that Violetta is bringing on stage?" I don't know why Violetta with a music box, but perhaps she does in some random production. So you want to use this time when you have the actual stuff. In the room, sometimes it's sort of makeshift. Good to notice, but not always necessary to ask that question, can I touch that, can I be on the stage? If you've got set in the room, okay. But now we're on stage. We've got more to deal with. And you can notice quite a bit, of course, but if you're comfortable, if there's been rehearsal process for you as a cover, if you have a good contact, the ASM is wonderful, you can say, is it safe for me to walk the stage on this break? Can I see the stage right prop table and handle the knife or the gun or something that your character would have to handle? Take those opportunities. Again, concise questions, appropriate times, all that kind of good judgment. But it can be a really good opportunity. You're going to probably see maybe any kind of stunts, any kind of complicated props during this time. Complicated. Do you have to shoot a gun? Is there some kind of water or blood or something like that? There's no audience at this time. You can come far down in the house and take a look. Lights are still sort of on, and see some of that stuff. So this is really important time to get your map to be incredibly complete. Part of making that map complete, I think, for me, is preparing track sheets. There are 3 things to prepare track sheets for. Let's talk about the first 2. Entrances and exits, and props. I like to use note cards. Again, Office Depot really loves me. I think that this is another map, more of a cheat sheet, kind of. And it only has to make sense to you. Keep that in mind. But this is something like, okay, Act 1, Scene 1. I'm going to enter in Wing 2 with knife in boot. And then I'm going to exit in Wing 1. Oh, we probably should know, like, up left or down right. With bag, knife, left on stage, table, center. So you're tracking where you're entering, where you're exiting, by the scene. I combine the props and the entrances and exits. That works for me. Might not work for you. Note card 2, fine. That's cool. We can have entrances and exits on one, props on another. Depends on how you think about things. This comes in handy for when the lights go out, or maybe when you might be able to be backstage and seeing a few things that you can, again, keep your map current, correct, and accessible in this case. So tracking those entrances and exits, I think, will give you a good shorthand map. But if you ever really did have to go on, we know you know the big map. We know you've thought about all these emotional cues. But in the heat of that moment, if you want to just pull up my entrances and exits, track sheet, I want to give this to my dresser just so she has it in that case, that could be something that would come in handy, I think. So, first stage rehearsal through the zits. I think we've got a pretty good map now. We've got a pretty good sense of things. We can't really see the conductor anymore from a good angle. So we haven't talked a lot about that in this process, but having those visual kind of observations are important, where the monitors, things like that. It's a big part of this process. So don't take for granted the tech rehearsals, even though they're so long. But they can be interesting if you sort of keep them interesting. If you listen actively, if you're observing actively. So let's talk about dress rehearsal through opening night. Now the lights are out. So in essence, what that means is you no longer have your score in front of you, or a score that's viable in terms of your reading the notes, rhythms, words you already know, or perhaps even following your map. So this is the time to really watch and see how the glue comes together in this production. How does tech become the on-stage production? There might be audiences at this point. You might be even further away now. It's sort of interesting in the cover world. The more important the event gets, the further away you actually physically get. So I think that there's not as much detail in this time frame because you are sort of observing more generally. But what is something that might be new in this time frame? Maybe costumes. That's what I'm thinking. So here's an interesting thing, and we didn't talk about this sort of in defining your role, but it is something to think about even earlier on, depending on what kind of learner you are again. If you're covering a woman who's 5'2" and $110, and you're 5'10", 160, not wearing the same pants, most likely. So, okay, so her costumes aren't my costumes, that's cool. Have I been fitted for costumes? No, obviously they're just going to throw me into something. Or yes, can I wear that costume just like around, one day when they're not rehearsing or something like that? Because you don't want to be sort of in earshot or eye shot as the cover, that would be a little uncouth. But, can you put it on? If you've been fitted, if they have costumes for you. That's a question you can ask. So I like to prepare a track sheet for costumes as well. I think this can be really helpful, especially for costumes will still exist, even though they might not be the same. Overcoats, hats, gloves, strange things in shoes. If there are complicated props that attach in some way, how is that going to affect your costumes when you're getting thrown on stage? Are there dressers in this house? Do those dressers have timings between entrances and exits, or timings for quick changes? You're going to start to notice maybe the quick changes here, and it's okay to ask the stage management team, how long exactly does so-and-so have for that quick change, and where does it take place? Does it take place right there off stage, or back in the dressing room, or in someone else's dressing room that may be closer? These are okay questions to ask at this juncture, and good things to be thinking about if you were to have to step in. So I like to think about these costumes. These track sheets can become really important depending on what you're covering. There's a lot of different ways to be a cover. We're talking about it from the perspective of, I'm watching, I'm hired to do this job. You might be in the show. You might have a small role. You might be covering another small role. You might be in the chorus. Changes your process a little bit, right? Changes how much you can notice. In some ways, gives you more detail because you're closer for longer. In a way, it's more appropriate for you to be backstage in the wing if you're playing another role, or you are in the chorus. So you see things from a different angle in preparing your map. But there might be a lot of memory involved, and maybe making shorter track sheets as someone in the show is going to work for you. I think there's just a lot of different things to think about. If you're covering multiple roles, these track sheets can also really come in handy, because you can have one for Romeo and one for Tybalt and one for Juliet, if you were covering all three of those, oddly, or whatever it is. In the Broadway world, it's not covers, it's standbys. Makes a little sense. They're doing 8 shows a week to have someone standing by if something were to go wrong. And in the Broadway world, I have, through my interviews, found that trailing is a lot more active in learning a role that you're covering. Following the person around who's doing the role you are standby for backstage through the whole process, watching the changes, watching the props, standing in between the curtains to see. In opera, this doesn't happen so much, but it does a little bit, depending on the company, depending on your role, are you a young artist? Are you a hired professional? Who are you covering? How much wing space is there? It's okay to ask. It may not be appropriate in that scenario. But trailing can be really, really helpful, especially for seeing those quick changes. And for keeping track in your track sheets of those different roles. The woman who was the swing in A Little Night Music recently closed, right? The female swing covered Anne, Charlotte, Petra, and the 2 Leaves leaders. 5 roles. Really different ladies, right? I mean, different voices, actually, maybe. But, you know, she's a pretty stellar artist. And you know, we're thinking Liebeslieders, that's waltzing, that's dancing, that's lots of things. Now, she's trailing all of these different parts. She's rehearsing for all of these different parts. She was keeping binders for each role, separating the music, separating the words, keeping those tracks separate so she could mentally review or physically review each role independently. So these track sheets for her became really important. You know, covering can just be an invigorating and petrifying experience on so many levels. You know, and night music has come up quite a bit in my research somehow. Most recently, and you may have read about this, the current Christine in Phantom of the Opera, who was a former Liebeslieder and Petra cover of A Little Night Music, got called because the swing at A Little Night Music was in Las Vegas, and they didn't have anybody to go on for Petra. So the cover for Christine went on for that Christine and Phantom, and the current Christine went over to Night Music and sang Petra, or while she was covering, not reviewing, now not her job, but they knew she knew the role, and she was in town, so she got the call. I hear she said confetti a few too many times, but I think that's okay for Miller's son. You know, but I think that kind of adrenaline and anxiety is going to happen in these scenarios. And if you've got a good map, if you're keeping track sheets, it can be something you can review quickly and know the details of, if you were detailed in your process. So, something to think about. Anything else we should know about this? Very exciting opening night then. You know, show's over. It's all good. Performance and production run. Really review time, probably, most likely. A lot of review. How long is the run? How often are you going to have to review? It's your show day just as much as the person you're covering's show day. What's your process going to be like? Reviewing is going to be different for everybody, all along the way, and again, sort of depending on how you learn. I've talked to a number of people who, when they're on the road, if they're staying in a hotel, they rearrange the apartment or hotel they're staying in to look like the set. That's something you can do in your own apartment too. So you can come home after a rehearsal and put the iPod in and walk the blocking. Visualize it, just get it in your body, think about it. Some people, I think, can just sort of sit and visualize themselves in the role, different. Maybe you need to sing it in. Is it a hard sing? You know, how much are you practicing during this time? You know, because the people on stage are getting to sing it in a little bit more. So the reviewing is really happening all along, but during this performance and production run, you have an opportunity to sort of choose, okay, how am I going to track the changes that are happening on stage? So directors left, we all know what happens sometimes. Things shift just a little bit, which is perfectly fine, you know, and so how are you going to track that? Is the assistant director and assistant conductor still in town? Are they tracking that and letting you know? Are you required to be at every performance? Are you required to be in the house? Are you required to be 5 minutes away, 5 miles away? So you need to know the details of your contract in that way during the performance and production run. And really, you know, especially if you're at a festival, let's say for a number of months and the performance run is long, you might already be preparing for what's next for you. Maybe you have another role coming up or a concert coming up, so you're preparing new and different music on top of reviewing this role. And that's happening for the principal artists as well, but you need to be able to balance those things in this review process. So I think that's a really important part of this. Now, let's see. Let's talk about music rehearsals. Oh, music rehearsals. Very sensitive time frame. So, you know, you show up on the first day of anything. I showed up here to Opera America today. I'm nervous. Woo. First day at Opera America. You know, first day of rehearsal. People are nervous. It doesn't matter how established, you have no idea the circumstances of the person you're covering. Perhaps, maybe you do, but let's say you don't. Did they just get off a plane from Europe? Were they recently doing a role that was the polar opposite of this role? You know, what's happening for them personally or professionally, all different kinds of things. That first day can be very tenuous. And here's where intuition and discretion really can come in handy. You know, a lot of times a company might take the opportunity to introduce the covers, especially if they're young artists. Fine. If you know the person you're covering, sure, introduce yourself. That'd be weird if you probably didn't. But it's a nervous rehearsal. That might not be the rehearsal to introduce yourself. It might be a rehearsal they don't allow you to be at. You know, companies and artists have the prerogative to say, no, I don't want this person in the room right now. Can't take it personally. It's just business. It's going to change how you're going to make your plan, make your map. You're going to need to ask those more concise questions. You might be getting information later, but it's a sensitive endeavor dealing with artists at any level. So I think especially that first sing through, you know, if you're able to be there, whew, awesome. You know, that's the time the conductor's really going to give some insights into decisions that they perhaps are going to make along the way, decisions you're going to need to notate, breath marks, phrasing, tempos. You know, when you go on as a cover, you are you, not that person. But it is your job to inhabit that role within the parameters of that production to the best of your ability. So if singer X is singing Una voce poco fa 3 times as fast as you're used to singing it, depends on the conductor, right? You might need to hop in a practice room, or you might be, you know, I'm going to sing it the way I'm going to sing it if that opportunity, you know, presents itself. So again, it's sort of that intuition, knowing what's going to become really important to notate within the music as they're making decisions. And sometimes decisions you've made with your coaches or with your teachers will change because a conductor might have historical context, or the production might be set in a particular way that gives more merit to another choice. And you have to take those things into consideration. The zitz probe, if they're doing a zitz, maybe they're doing a vandal, then, you know, it's a little more kind of rehearsal you can observe, again, from the house usually. But if they're doing a zitz, this is, again, kind of an anxious time, I think, because they have to sing it. The cast has to sing the show. And maybe there's been a lot of marketing going on. You know, this is, okay, I've got to remember how to sing this role. And maybe they've got their score in front of them, very, very detailed. Maybe they just know it. Maybe they love visits. Maybe it's their favorite rehearsal and they just love to stand there and sing Giovanni, you know? And maybe it's really an anxious time because the voice is a gentle and, you know, strange thing. And so if they're not having a great singing day or they've been in rehearsal late, you know, there can be some anxiety there. So I think the zitz is a great time to just be an audience member, to get a cup of coffee and sit there and enjoy the music. Maybe you get to see the conductor, and that's kind of neat. But really, I think the zitz probe is just something to enjoy. Now keep in mind, you can go on at any time. The sing-through might actually be one of the most likely times you would go on if a person is late coming to a rehearsal process. So you always want to be ready. And especially at a musical rehearsal, you, the cover, need to be warm. Because if you have to step in, they're expecting you to sing. You really kind of need to be warm at any rehearsal, but especially I think these musical rehearsals, that's something to keep in mind. That is at the crux of what's being rehearsed, so be ready for that. So what if you do go on? You know, a sing-through, rehearsal, in performance, you know, the principal artist has been staged for 6 hours on their AGMA contract, so you have to do the remaining 3 in the evening rehearsal. Lots of different ways you can go on through this process. It's really interesting, you know, and this is sort of part of the psychology of being a cover. If you're going on, something went wrong. You know, and even though you might be doing your happy dance or your freak out dance in your head, someone is ill, someone is injured, someone had to go, someone screwed up the schedule, you know, something happened. It's not meant to be offensive. And this comes from one of my favorite quotes through my interviews from actually a director. who said, you know, we're hoping you don't go on. And you know, that's kind of hard to hear as the cover, because you're doing your thing and you're doing your job with integrity and artistry in your own little rehearsal land. But if you go on, something went wrong. So you got to be sensitive to that. That's sort of that intuition as well, I think. Based on my data pulling, the likelihood that you will go on is 28%. It's really weird though. Now, you know, I have had the opportunity to go on in a number of different capacities in the last 5 years, and they're all different and all exciting, but tenuous, because, as you said, something's off if you're standing out there doing it. Now, sometimes you might be going on for a performance. There might be a set performance for you to do, a cover performance or perhaps a student matinee. That's a great opportunity and something that's set and can be really exciting. If you go on, this is a checklist that I have set up. Now this is meant for a company that has a cover process in place. This is going to change depending on where you are, what kind of support you have. But it's your job as the cover, kind of your butt on the line, regardless, to be self-sufficient, to know that these are the things you need, whether you're doing them yourself or you have someone there supporting you, holding a hand. So the most important thing for me is to determine the timeline. Do you have 3 minutes, 30 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, or 3 weeks to get ready to go? So that's the first thing to do. If you've got 3 minutes, there probably is no time to do any of this, and you should just sort of go with the wind. But you know, if you've got 3 hours, okay, do I have any holes? Is there any part of the show that I need to review? Go, review now. You know, take that opportunity to do it. Who's my contact person? Who called me? Okay, is the assistant director still in town? Is the stage manager here? Where's the ASM? Who's my contact person in this moment? Who can I, you know, go to with all of my questions? If you've got 3 hours, house isn't open, most likely you've got time to walk the stage. Great time to make sure you know which way that door opens. Is there a step there? How do those curtains look between wing 1 and wing 2? I'm going through this fast, I know, but we'll have time to talk about all kinds of things. You're going to want to, you know, get out on that stage so that you're confident, visually speaking. You know, kind of, you can feel then how far the tree is away. And maybe you've gotten to do some of this already, and maybe you haven't. So this can be a really important moment. Wearing the monitors, things like that. Check in with wardrobe, makeup. Probably by the time you think to check in with them, they will have already checked in with you. Not the time to say, I look better in pink than red. Just go with what you got. You know, yes, you have to sing the role. You need to be comfortable. You know, if the corset is too tight, if the pants don't fit, that is important to you going on. There may not actually be time to even address that issue. But if there is, of course, that's your prerogative. You do have to sing the role. But, you know, be straight. So, are there any props you haven't touched? Are there any complicated stunts or props that you have never worked with or done that you have time to do and can work with a fight choreographer or with a stage manager to go through those things? Are there tricky ensemble moments? A big duet? Is it worth checking in with a fellow castmate? Keep in mind, again, something happens that you're going on. So how does that affect this cast? What's the process been like? What's the room felt like? How happy and go lucky is this cast at the moment? Things that you kind of just need to be aware of. The music staff, the conductor, you're going to want to check in with them. They're probably, again, going to check in with you before you think to check in with them. Through your time as a cover, it's really important to know the list of things that is slightly maybe different for you. Or things maybe that if you had the opportunity to talk to that conductor to say, you know, absolutely, and I'm going to sing the same cadenza, or my cadenza is different but fits in the same exact time frame. You know, keeping in mind that if they've made a specific choice for a specific reason, you're going to need to fit in to that choice. But there is some flexibility. You need to go on and do the role confidently in the way you know you can do it, but within the parameters that have already been set. So know the 4 things you want to talk to the music staff about. Are there recits? You know, is it worth saying, you know, this recit is challenging for me, or just so you know, I'll touch base with you here in this ensemble. You know, can I catch you there? You can say those things in that moment. But know the score well enough to be able to grab those 4 things right away. I think that's really important. ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. This now, everybody's like, ask us everything. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be discreet. You know, we're throwing you out on the stage. What do you need? So, you know your questions in a way. Through this process, know where there are holes that have happened along the way. That you just, are curious about the traffic issues backstage or where the chorus really is. Or you know that you're with the purple chorister, but is that a man or a woman? I can't tell from the house, or something like that. If they're in a weird costume, something like that. So, this is the time to ask those questions. It's okay. It's your moment. Happy dance, freak out dance, being sensitive to the situation. So, a couple of things to remember down here: filling someone's shoes, being within the parameters of that production. It's important to hit your marks. It's most important to hit your marks the more people are on stage, and the more stuff that's on stage, and the more dangerous things that are happening on stage are. But you are doing your show, and it's okay to do that, and to have fun within doing your job in this scenario, and to feel satisfied by the fact that you fit into this ensemble because you did your homework really, really well. And it will be scary. You won't have sung the sextet with those 5 other voices. But, that can be exciting too. And if you know it really well, it can be exhilarating. And that's what this is really all about. Make the process satisfying. Make it exhilarating. Give yourself an opportunity to learn and experience these things and get a paycheck at the end of it and feel good at the end of this process. Because you learned a lot, because you did a lot. Just a lot of things to think about. On the back of the sheet, there's the 20 do's. I'm not going to go through them. They're common sense in a lot of ways. I like to think in do's, like I said. However, I think there are 3 don'ts that are important to mention. In my interviewing and surveying people, keeping in mind that there's a rehearsal going on in a room, especially when you're in the room, is really important. Not to talk. Seems kind of elementary, right? When in an elementary education class, they tell teachers, well, it's best for grammar school if you've got the kids with their feet on their floor, heads up, eyes forward. The focus is really much better. And I'm thinking, well, that really applies to grown-ups too. And especially to covers, it's that hit refresh, actively observing. Get in a space, create your rehearsal space in a way that's going to be productive for you and not disrupt the flow of what's going on. And it can be challenging, especially in some of those circumstances that breed a little unprofessionalism, when you're comfortable, when these are your friends. And it is fun, but there's work to be done. So keep that in mind. Second don't, do not mouth the words or act out the role anywhere near anyone through the whole process. It's just not a good idea. You don't want to make another artist nervous. You don't want to be distracting to not the artist you're covering, but even any of the other artists in the room. Wait till you get home. You have your review time. Yes, I know it's a lot to memorize sometimes. These long Rossini finales are challenging, but you've just got to be able to do it in your head and not mouth the words. And lastly, try not to hover. Sort of that intuitive kind of, we don't want the soprano to get hit by a bus. No, we don't. We want to be a positive force in the room, and if the opportunity arises to ask a question, to be backstage, to walk the stage, to converse with the person you're covering or the conductor or director, great. All incredible opportunities to learn, to grow, to be a part of the process, but not always something you will experience. So you have to be, again, erring on the side of discretion in this scenario. So we've talked a lot about the process of covering. There's probably hours and hours worth of information in terms of different types of companies, different types of scenarios, different types of roles, how blocking gets in a stage manager's score so someone else can read the map. Is that the kind of map you want? Because 6 months from now when you open up Eugenio Nagin, is your map still going to make sense? Does it matter? Is this a role you're going to do in this production again? Who knows? Or cover again? You're going to work perhaps with an agent or a manager who's going to want to know what roles you can do on a day's notice, on 3 days' notice, on 3 weeks' notice, and 3 months' notice. So this process is going to help inform those decisions that you make as a professional artist. This is a lot of nuts and bolts, right? Just sort of a lot of general information for you to hopefully take with. The secrets I think the intuition is a big secret. I think part of the secret of covering is that it's a really hard job. And you have to just sort of accept that and know yourself and know how you learn and know whether or not this is a job you want in the future. As a young artist, it's often a job you are given, and it might not be one that you want. And that's okay to think that, but it's a job that you now have. So how are you going to do the job? What's the plan going to be? You know, the covers I talk to who work professionally as covers, they love the danger. They love it. They love the detail, the challenge, the exhilaration. It suits their personality. They don't mind being a wallflower in the room and observing this process and knowing confidently that if they were to have to step in, it's something they could do no problem. That may not be your personality, and that's okay to accept, but if it is your job to do the job of covering, you have to change your mind a little bit. You know, psychologists will tell you can change a cognition, you know, get away from that negative thinking. You know, you may have people around who say, oh, I could sing it better, I could do it better. I think that takes you pretty far away from your power source. And the goal is to empower yourself to have a satisfying experience, to enjoy the process, even though you aren't physically up there. So I think it's important to stay away from that negative thinking. As much as you might think it breeds confidence, as we mentioned before, confidence isn't exactly what we necessarily want. Competence, yes. Confidence, not always the case. So knowing that psychology is important. And part of that psychology is in how you define success. You have a job, doing what you love to do, thinking about Mozart all day. Awesome. You know, that's a successful day in my mind. And for some artists, it might not feel as successful, and that's for them to define. You know, is this going to be a part of my life as an artist? Being a cover one month and then being a principal artist the next, and going off and covering here or there, and having the person that I covered then be covering me later, as we mentioned earlier. That can happen, and it just depends on how you're defining that for yourself within your career. So, questions, things we want to talk about further? I mean, this was just a ton of information in longer than I was supposed to talk, but I'm pretty sure I didn't say like 45,000 things I was supposed to. So, you know, anything about your experiences you want to talk about more? No? No? I've been very thorough. I'm impressed with myself. You know, I think you're going to have to do this, whether you like it or not, but have fun. Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
This is maybe not so much cover as it is the principal artist.
Yeah.
But your big three really stood out to me because,
oh, because you see that not happening probably, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I've experienced that pretty much always.
Yeah. In terms of the don'ts you're talking about.
Yes, in terms of looking out and seeing someone completely staring back at me and like mouthing the...
And it makes you weirded out, right?
Yeah, and so just personally my strategy is to just like silently freak out and be professional.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering if there's maybe a more proactive approach.
Well, I mean, if you're the principal artist and something about what's happening in the room is prohibiting you from doing your job, you can go to stage management and say, you know, the covers need to be in a different place than they are right now, or not be sitting so close to the lip of the stage, and you know, I talked to many artists who said time and time again, they've seen covers thrown out of the room, and it happens. And you know, I think it perhaps is artists at various levels doing these things. I don't know, different types of houses that might be working with this type of scenario, but I think the don'ts are important, and part of the seminar stemmed out of me seeing a lot of that too, and feeling like, you know, I think we owe it to ourselves as young artists, as up-and-coming artists, as professional artists, as cover artists, to support our colleagues on stage and not be a distraction. You know, we know everybody wants a job. You know, it's, you know, an audition, it's like the hire me lean, right? So you don't need to do the hire me lean as a cover. You already have the job as a cover, so do a good job, and maybe another job will come out of it. No, I think you're right. I think that happens a lot. It was easy to pick those three don'ts. And perhaps maybe we'll motivate or inspire some people to live it. Anything else? Well, I hope you had a fun time. And if you have any questions, I'll be around. You can always, email me with weird things. Of course, I'm happy to be around. But I hope that the covering process won't be scary or not fun for you, perhaps after this hour or so. So, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Katie.
No problem.
That's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of
let's
stuff.
go have a drink.
Yeah.
Thank
Are
you.
those
That was
extras?
brilliant.
Oh, take care. Thanks.
Those
Oh,
are those,
thank you.
and then these two.